Hi everyone, my name is Lindsey Grossman and I'm the business lead for Block Self-Custody Wallet. I'm joined here by Fadi Elsalameen, who's joining us to talk to us about the power of Bitcoin and a number of global communities that he's worked on. Fadi, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a brief intro.
Hi, thank you, Lindsay. My name is Fadi Elsalameen. I'm with the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and my main interest and research has been about Bitcoin as a tool for freedom, to advance democracy, and counter corruption around the world.
Thanks, Fadi. Let's jump right in. I'd love for you to talk about how you've seen Bitcoin play a material role in the day-to-day conflicts and economies that you've worked on. Talk to us about some real-life examples or data and how Bitcoin has created more economic opportunity for the people that you've worked with.
Uh, I'll start with Palestine because that's where I'm from. And what I've noticed, I've worked on anti-corruption campaigns for the past 12 years in the Palestinian territories. When you have a dictator, when you have an authoritarian regime, banks become a tool of the authoritarian regime to silence anyone who is raising concerns about democracy, about freedom of press, freedom of religion. And so let's say you have a bank account and you start criticizing the president, or you start criticizing, why don't we have elections after 18 years? We need free and fair elections to represent everybody. All of a sudden, you will find yourself that the banks have been ordered by the same authoritarian regime to debank you, shut you out completely. You're accused of money laundering. You could be accused of terrorism. You could be accused of any crime to justify the attacks on you. And so you go from being a concerned citizen to becoming a quote unquote a criminal in the eyes of the authoritarian regime. Bitcoin is a completely different platform. Nobody has control over it. Nobody could utilize it as a tool for dissent or silencing fair and free criticism in a democracy or in an authoritarian regime. So this has been the case where I've seen it similar. It's the common thread that I've seen, whether you are in Kazakhstan, Ukraine, certain parts of Africa, or other places. This has been the most usage of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin platform to support people who believe in human rights, in freedom of democracy, fighting corruption, and advancing the cause of civil society.
Let's talk about maybe some specific examples. I've heard you talk about in the past how this can help people with international remittances, people who are sending money back to their family in another country, perhaps even to receive income or to pay for goods and services. Maybe talk us through some of the real life, maybe payments use cases that you've seen.
I'll give a few examples. There's one in Venezuela, for example. Right now, 20,000 people are getting paid almost monthly. 20,000 transactions are being done monthly using Bitcoin and stablecoin to pay doctors, nurses, and others. And because mainly the banking system is a hostage of the current regime. So the government that is democratically elected and is on the outside supported by the United States and other parts of the world that believe in democracy have found that the use of Bitcoin and stablecoin is the only way to support the people on the ground. So you're getting nurses, doctors, grocery store owners, journalists, etc. That is the only way they're making an income, and they're able to support themselves. Another usage is in Palestine, for example. You've got the Palestinian diaspora around the world. You could be a good business owner that really has a large family, and you want to support the family, and you want to make sure that they're prospering. If, for example, I want to send just a wire transfer using bank to bank, I have to go through at least 3 or 4 layers of security checks for no reason, no specific reason against me. It's just that's what's been in place. Beyond the security checks, whether it's from U.S. agencies, Israeli agencies, or Palestinian agencies, then you get into the weeds of corruption. the local guys will ask, we've noticed that you have a bank account. The bank account has this and this much money, meaning that they really have access. There's no privacy laws. You're not protected at all. And they'll demand a bribe from you. Now, if you live in the United States and you're an American citizen, if you pay a bribe to a foreign government official, you are subject to OFAC regulations and punishment. The Department of Justice is going to target you as well. So, which is easier, to go through all these impossible hoops to support my family, or to just send them directly Bitcoin? So what I'm noticing, the Palestinian community, the Palestinian diaspora around the world have moved from traditional banking to using Bitcoin and to just send remittances because of the impossible regulations that are being placed on the banking system.
And to take that one step further, so in this case, you want to send money back to your family. How do they then use Bitcoin to, let's say, anything from you pay for food, medical services, whatever their day-to-day expenses are? Has that been easy for them to use as a form of currency?
It's becoming easier, right? It's not the beauty of people who are living under harsh conditions. They're very innovative and very creative. So there are Telegram groups. There are meetups, they're peer-to-peer, they're where you could convert some of the Bitcoin into cash if you need to, and vice versa. And there'll always be somebody who's interested in buying Bitcoin because they're traveling and it's easier. So there are many creative ways of how to do it, and they range from either you can purchase directly using Bitcoin to Bitcoin, or you can convert it using the different groups and the known communities. And here's the beautiful thing. Palestinians will find Israelis who are using Bitcoin and via Telegram, or they'll meet them in Tel Aviv or Ramallah or Hebron, and say, can we exchange? Can you give me shekels or dollars and I'll give you Bitcoin, or vice versa? These groups exist on all kinds of social media applications.
That's great. Going a layer deeper on some of the use cases, how have you seen different wallets, right? Or wallets essentially a way to prove ownership on the distributed ledger, and it's a way to move money. Software wallets, right? So app-based wallets or web-based or hardware wallets, if you have any advice to people who are making those types of things, what would you tell them to make them easier to use, easier to access? You've seen these in real life.
The easiest. Look, everybody has a smartphone. Everybody, more or less, if they don't have an iPhone, they have a Samsung, so they have a smartphone. So, and for people who are using it for daily transactions, they're not storing large amounts of Bitcoin. So I would keep that in mind as you develop a solution that is easy, quick to use, here's my wallet, your wallet, done, and using it on a phone, or maybe a combination of both, for those who are trying to use Bitcoin for wealth storage, or for larger amounts of Bitcoin. Because normally people who are want to hold a large amount of Bitcoin, they're not comfortable with it being on their phone. They much rather have it in a separate place. But for people who just want to buy groceries, pay for tickets, move on daily, I think it's much easier to have it on the phone. So I would just keep those two ideas in mind.
That's great. We've talked about some of the benefits of Bitcoin to generate better economic opportunity, but there's also some naysayers out there. There's some people who push back on this argument that Bitcoin is a true enabler of economic freedom. They say, look, international development is way more complicated than digital currency. So maybe let's look at those with an objective frame and say, is any of that pushback fair?
I think any pushback is fair, but is it accurate or not? That is the question. I think on the case of Bitcoin, I encourage those who have been very critical of it to get to know it more and then understand the different applications of it. I'm learning about this every day, and then every day there's a new application, there's a new usage case. And I'll give a quick example. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that the German government is looking into solutions how to use Bitcoin to pay remittances to Holocaust survivors who are living in areas where it's complicated to do for them to be paid. And so that to me is the pleasant fact of the year. And so I understand people are skeptical. It's not something that is you can feel in your hand, and it's not something that you can hold into your leather wallet. I get that. My grandmother used to hold, her bank was her coins on her traditional Palestinian dress, and so whenever there was a political volatility and she needed to spend, she would just cut one of her coins and exchange that for food or for shelter or whatever. We're in a different age. Bitcoin is something real. It's changing people's lives for the better because of the nature of Bitcoin and the usage of electricity and the fact that you can generate electricity from clean sources. People who have nothing are able to change sunlight into money, into Bitcoin, are able to change water and using water dams that exist in your villages to produce electricity for them, and also generate some sort of medium of exchange for to pay for things. And this is not theory. This is happening in some villages in Kenya. I encourage people to look into it. So I understand the criticism. Every amount of criticism, the healthy amount, is always welcomed. I just don't think people should shut down the idea that this is something that cannot be stopped. It's already here, and they just need to understand more about it.
Got it. And if you actually, I'm curious about your own personal journey to Bitcoin. Do you remember the moment that someone first told you about Bitcoin, or what was your journey to become more educated on it?
Yeah, so in my head, I always thought it was this far removed thing that has no real use into what I'm doing. I'm trying to fight corruption in Palestine. I'm trying to improve people's lives. I grew up as the oldest of 9 in a very poor area. So my goal was, I have been lucky. I had a good education, and I need to find a way how to make use of that for my community and for the people I came from, so that hopefully when I'm at the end of my journey in this life, that I've done, I've left it in a better place than when I came into it. And this started my curiosity with Alex Gladstein, who wrote a book about the usage of Bitcoin. It's called Check Your Financial Privilege. And we started this conversation about, hey, did you know that Palestinians don't have a central bank? Yes. Did you know that Palestinians can't have their own currency? Okay. Have you thought about Bitcoin? Have you ever thought about the economic side of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? And then slowly, Alex and I started getting into this, and it opened this whole entire world to me. It's an unlimited, world of probabilities and ways to use it. And it really taught me, even though I've been immersed in the conflict and in trying to obviously bring peace between Palestinians and Israelis and fight corruption, promote democracy, it really opened a whole entire world to me that I never thought was possible. And I actually wish that every politician, whether they're Israeli or Palestinian or even American, would look at Bitcoin and how it can untangle some of the issues that are in the world of politics today are seen impossible to solve, right? Some of the, I can use, there's one thing called the Paris Agreement. There's the Oslo Accords. When you move these, these agreements, these, political binding agreements that look impossible to untangle, when you introduce them into the world of Bitcoin, they're really easy to maneuver and move around. It's incredible. So that's been my journey with Bitcoin, Human Rights Foundation, and Alex Gladstein. And I encourage everybody to read his book, Check Your Financial Privilege, because you will see how we take so many things for granted. We assume that banks are here forever, and this is the only way that we can move forward. And then when you put Bitcoin into the equation, the world looks very promising and very hopeful for every person on earth.
Speaking of financial privilege, I think there might be some people listening to this who might say, oh, well, I'm not personally a political dissident. I live in a country where I can access a bank account, not my problem. And as we talk to more people, we start talking about access and limits, or, have you ever had a time where your payment got slowed down or where you had to contact customer support because because there was a limitation on your account. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, like on this idea of access and control. It's not just a problem that people in challenging economic environments face. It is truly a global phenomenon. Can you maybe talk about how some of these restrictions impact everyone, not just in certain locations?
Sure. I mean, I think people, again, it's a privilege to have a bank account. It's not open for everybody. There are people who are not allowed or can't have an account because of all the different regulations. There are such very strict laws and regulations, whether it's anti-money laundering or terrorism finance, or that you could be someone who has no relation to money laundering, no relation to terrorism finance, but just because you trigger one or two concerns in a bank, or you live in an area that triggers that concern, they'll shut down your bank account, and you can't, today without a bank account, you can't function unless you move into Bitcoin. So that's one. Two, for people who think, if I live in America or in Europe, I don't need to worry about Bitcoin. It's not my issue. Look at inflation. Bitcoin is seen as a way to preserve value, right? The same way gold is, the same way other. So if, one actually comparison that I really I liked was, had we gotten in America the stimulus checks using Bitcoin, the value of those checks, which was, I think, was around $1,200 or $1,500, would have been today, with the use of Bitcoin, around $3,000 or $4,000. So yes, it might, you're not pressed. You might find a justification why you don't need Bitcoin. But if you look at the upside, if you use Bitcoin, I think you'll be very interested, because everybody would want to have more value and would want not to lose value, especially, right now with inflation being so high. So, again, I really invite people to look at Bitcoin with an open mind. It's a whole world. It's not just,
finite amount. It's non-inflationary from that perspective, but also in the short term, it can go up and down. People say, look, it's volatile, and so people will maybe question, well, how can that be a form of currency? How can you use that for to be able to pay for goods and services, food or everyday expenditures? What's your thought on that, on Bitcoin's fluctuation in value?
I mean, the same thing as gold. So the value of a loaf of bread has been, in terms of gold, has been the same since the 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, right? But gold prices go up, go down, but at the end it preserved its value. And so I think the same will happen with Bitcoin. I don't worry about the ups and downs. I just worry about the long-term value of it and its application and usage in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the utility will also, I think, soften that over time too, once people start to see its real life application, which is how we started really this conversation today. Look, one last question for you. For people who want to continue this conversation, engage with you on some of your research, ask you questions, where's the best place for them to reach you?
I'm on Twitter, so it's just my last name, Elsalameen, at Twitter. And again, for me, I'm learning every day, every minute about this. So I'm happy to learn from people and engage in a conversation that hopefully we both come out of at the end learning something new.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to echo the open mind component of that. I think one of the things that is special about the Bitcoin community is that there's a lot of exchange and dialogue, and you can come to it with an open mind and willingness to learn, because this is a new space for everyone. And so we should welcome more and more people to become curious, to explore its use cases, and why it can hopefully impact the world for the better. So thank you so much for spending your time with us, Fadi. I really appreciate it.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.